is one of the great violinists and great artists of the century.
What Ida offers, only very few have to offer. And this is the profoundest and deepest feeling she transmits through her instrument.
I think she is one of the very greatest violinists. I have my own opinion how violin should be played, and she is just my player.
And she's in the top, for me, 2 or 3 of this century.
It's always a thrill and a new experience every time you stand on that stage. It's as if you had never played before, because every concert is different. In 1986, my father and I returned to our native land of Poland. I had been invited to judge a Wieniawski International Violin Competition and to perform with the Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra. It was our first opportunity to return to our roots since leaving this country more than 50 years ago. I was born in the small Polish city of Chełm, not far from the border with Russia. This is the first time my father and I have seen Chełm since we left here in the 1930s. It was here that one day, when I was 3½, I said to my mother that I wanted to play my sister Alice's violin. My mother said, "Don't you dare take Ala, as she was called in Poland, as violin." But I did not listen. I went up to the high table, I picked up the violin and I played. Well, my mother was shocked.
When I came back from school in the afternoon, she was playing the violin. And I just couldn't believe it, because I knew she never held the violin in her hands, because I wouldn't have let her touch it.
A couple of hours later, my father walked in, and my mother announced to him, "Look, Nathan, Ida is playing."
She said, "Dad, she didn't let me go. I want her to play for you something. Because when you play, whatever you sing for me, I will play for you." So I don't remember what I was singing, but I started to sing, and she immediately started to play.
That was like a dream come true to him. All of his life he wanted to be a solo violinist. Didn't work out, and he hoped that one of his children would be able to play.
I said, "No, I can't believe my own ears." I called up that Dobkowski. He was my friend. He was a good fiddler.
It was such a remarkable feat. I'll never forget that. I said to the father, I said, "Look here, Nathan, you have a gem. Maybe you don't realize that. Well, this little kid," I said, "if you take good care of her, if you don't neglect her, will be a fine violinist someday. This is the one to take care. Now tell her what to do. She needs a special man." I said, "But there is one I know of in Warsaw. And his name is Professor Michałowicz."
And so we went to Warsaw in the spring, the whole family. Here, as a small child, I played the Wieniawski Violin Concerto in D minor. I returned in 1986 to play the same piece with the Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra, directed this time by Tadeusz Strugała. I was touched when, before going on stage, I was greeted by Kazimierz Wielkomirski, who conducted the orchestra when, as a child, I played this concerto here so long ago. When I play the Wieniawski Concerto D minor, obviously it brings to mind my very early days, my childhood. I was really very, very moved this time to be playing it again. As far as I can recall, our life in Warsaw was very, very modest. We lived in one room. My mother tried to do everything to make ends meet. She worked very, very hard. So did my father. The main thing in my life was my family. And I was happy that we were all together. That meant everything to me. I didn't notice the penury. All I noticed was the love, and we always had enough food. My father was always terribly ambitious for me to be a top musician. So whenever a very famous violinist, one of the superstars, visited Warsaw, invariably there was Mr. Haendel with his baby. Sometimes it was rather difficult to approach these people because wherever they went, I suppose they were always faced with parents who had prodigies. So they tried to get rid of those people. Szymon Goldberg was an internationally known Polish violinist. He was home in Warsaw to visit, and father promptly took me to play for him.
It was a great experience, really, to see such a tiny, she may have been 5 years of age, to see such a little something to play so extraordinary with disregard to any difficulties on the very dangerous little piece of fingerboard. It was a tremendous projection, already with vibrato, and there's just a little miraculous personality.
My father's idea was actually Joseph Szigeti. This was the man my father really wanted me to study with. So one day he came to Warsaw, and father decided that he has to make him listen to me at any cost.
After the concert, I went into Szigeti. I told him, I have a child, a great talent. So he was just skeptical.
I began to play, and I was there for at least 1 hour. He turned towards me as soon as I began to play, and he said, well, of course, this is a tremendous talent, and it has to be taken care of and nurtured and so on. So my father said, Mr. Szigeti, You are the one I would like Ida to study with.
He was living in Paris that time. So he said, come to Paris and I will teach her.
Father decided it was essential to go to Szigeti in Paris. But I was very sad to be leaving my mother and sister. Father arrived at Szigeti's door, only to hear the violinist say that he had been offered a tour of the United States. The first Wieniawski International Violin Competition was soon to be held in Warsaw. Father was convinced that if I did well in it, I would be launched on a great career. He took me to Karl Flesch, one of the most famous violin teachers in Europe at the time, so that I could be prepared for the competition. It was the beginning of an association with Professor Flesch that lasted for several years. After working with Karl Flesch in 1935, I returned to Poland for the competition. In 1986, I returned again to Poland for the same competition, this time as a member of the jury. Warsaw had been destroyed, and so, after the war, the competition was moved to the city of Poznań, where it takes place every 5 years. This is the oldest and still one of the most important violin competitions in the world. Some of the finest young talent of today is here taking part. I can hardly believe that it is so many years since I was one of them. Jeanette Neveu, who was about 17 at the time, took first prize. David Oistrakh, the leading Soviet violinist of his time, took second. He was already in his 20s. I was awarded the first prize for a Polish competitor. The excitement was almost too much to absorb. We were invited to the palace of the President of the Polish Republic and presented to him. This palace was completely destroyed in the war. It was marvelously rebuilt, and it was in this room of the original palace that we were received by the President. I find judging difficult. It requires dissecting and analyzing performances, as well as appreciating the overall musicality. I don't like playing God with so much responsibility for someone's future. The mayor of Poznań asked me to play at a special reception at City Hall. He was so charming about it, I felt I couldn't refuse. The Polonaise in D major by Henryk Wieniawski seemed appropriate. competition, Father and I went to Baden-Baden in Germany to continue my lessons with Karl Flesch. Here I confronted a serious problem. Often, when playing with a pianist, I would not know when to begin. Karl Flesch was baffled. One day, he called Father and myself for a conference, and he said, I really don't understand it. You play all the concerti, all the caprices by Paganini, everything, and all of a sudden, you don't know when to come in. I was terribly troubled by that, and I said, well, what's going to become of me? Then one day, I was in bed, almost ready to fall asleep, when it hit me like a bolt. I said to myself, my God, maybe there's more to it than what meets the eye. I sat up and I said, Daddy, can you tell me something? Do all these signs and the dots and the commas and everything, does it mean something? Well, at that same instant, Father sat up too, and he said, my God, Ida, don't you know? I said, no, what? Well, then of course it means something. Does one by any chance have to count it like arithmetic? Father said, well, of course. Oh my God, I said, well, in that case, I'm saved, because I just have to learn how to count. That's all there is to it. And then I was so relieved, I fell asleep. My mind was at rest. Professor Flesch decided to move from Germany to London and take up residence there in the 1930s. Obviously, that's where my father was going to take me, to London, England. I was very, very excited about studying with Karl Flesch. I liked him. Pupils were very frightened by Karl Flesch because he could be terribly severe, sometimes a great disciplinarian. But with me, he was very playful. He kissed me and he paid me compliments when necessary, but he could also be very strict. And that was as it should have been. My father just brought me to the house of Karl Flesch. So we were there behind the door, and then I heard the most divine piece of music. And I thought to myself, my God, I do identify with that tragic sound very, very much. It just went to the core of my spirit, and I said to myself, my God, I would love to play that. And that was Chausson's poem. I was very, very melancholy when I was a child. And that type of music, that style appealed to my nature very much. I felt that I wanted to play it and express what was inside me, and I felt that I could express it because of the very nature of that work. Carflash gave his okay for me to make my debut in London, he suggested to father that I get myself a manager. There was a very well-known agent, Harold Holt, in London, and Harold Holt agreed to manage me, but first he wanted to hear me play. So an audition was arranged at the old Wigmore Hall. I just played a few bars from a concerto, and he immediately rose, went to my father and said, "Mr. Haendel, I think we should try and launch Ida on the same type of career as Yehudi Menuhin, on a very big scale." He decided that the debut would be at the old Queen's Hall, which was a lovely hall from every point of view, acoustically, visually, and so on, and lots of orchestra concerts took place there. But I thought I was really privileged to have a recital at the Queen's Hall, which was only given to the very few already known artists. And here I was unknown, playing at this marvelous hall.
Never in my then fairly young life had I heard any artist, let alone anyone that young, who played with such enormous security and assurance, and just as if she knew exactly where she was going, both on the instrument and emotionally and musically.
Sir Henry Wood, founder of the promenade or prom concerts early in the century, invited me to play the Brahms concerto at one of them in 1937. It was the beginning of one of the most treasured relationships of my youth, and the first of a lifelong series of prom concerts. Father and I were far from happy because he still had not been able to have my mother and sister join us in London. Desperately he needed money to bring my mother and my sister over from Poland.
We were still in Warsaw, and it was, and Father used to write to us letters, "Please rush and do it fast and come over, because it's dangerous there."
Finally, he got them out, and my mother and my sister joined us in Belgium, in Knock. And that was really a wonderful day in my life. With a contract and concert tours in England and Europe, we were able to afford a house in Hampstead, London, and it became home for many years. The war hit Poland not long after my mother and sister joined us. Jews were the first to feel its full fury. Almost none survived. The entire magnificent city of Warsaw was leveled by the war's end. If it were not for the fact that I was a violinist, of course we would have stayed in Poland and been murdered like everybody else, like all the Jewish people there. But by some divine decree, the fact that I was playing the violin and that Father had to take me out of Poland, we were all saved. It was a salvation for all of us, my immediate family and myself. This great monument to the Jews who died in the Holocaust, almost the entire Jewish population of Poland, stands in what was for centuries the Jewish ghetto of Warsaw, where we had lived. George Enescu, the great Romanian composer, lived for many years in Paris. He was one of the greatest masters of the violin, and my father was determined that I should study with him. And in our sort of minds, Enescu was great also because he was the teacher of Yehudi Menuhin.
He had a musical mind such as I've never encountered. For me, Enescu remains the greatest musician I've ever known.
That's it.
And the most inspiring one. There was nothing he touched in music, whether it was on an upright piano, or whether it was the violin, or whether he whistled or grunted. It was making music.
These are the streets that were so familiar to me in my childhood. Growing up here in London, beginning my professional career, expanding my repertoire. Enescu was the great master of Bach, and as we worked together, I seemed to hear Bach the giant for the first time. The frills were removed, and the simplicity and purity of line revealed in all its grandeur. The war years were difficult for everyone in Britain. Night after night, when the German bombers came, we went down this elevator to the station platform, deep underground. All over London, people were doing the same thing, trying to escape the bombs. I remember so well the long nights in this station, crowded with so many others, our family holding onto its little patch of concrete so we could sleep a bit during the night. Overhead, London was suffering terribly. I played for the wounded who came in after bombing, various enemy camps. And one time I remember the wounded were lying in their beds, and I did not take an accompanist with me. I played unaccompanied music like Bach, Paganini, and Ave Maria by Schubert. And they listened with such rapt attention. It was very inspiring and very moving for me personally. One great London institution that survived the war was the Royal Albert Hall, built by Queen Victoria.
Memories?
Memories, yes. You know, Brian, I remember when I first came to London, I was a little girl, and I saw this little building. I knew that very, very few artists appeared here. It was just a pinnacle of an artist's dream to appear at the Albert Hall. The first famous artists that I heard was Yehudi Menuhin. And there I was in this vast building, listening in awe to Yehudi Menuhin, absolutely overwhelmed. I never even dreamed that I was going to play here one day. I was invited to give a recital. And there I was, you know, me, little me, standing in this tremendous hall and playing with the piano.
And it's been an unbroken link since then, because,
Yes.
I mean, all through the years now,
That's
all
true.
the proms, etc., etc.
I was linked and involved with the proms throughout my whole career. So I'm very proud to have been playing at the Albert Hall all my life.
And then
In 1987, I played the Britten Concerto at a prom concert with the BBC Symphony, conducted by my friend of so many years, Sir John Pritchard. Leading towards it, and the chorale is just like
And the violin spins all this around.
a bit of heaven, isn't it? Suddenly coming.
She's adored by the orchestral community in London, by which I mean all the orchestral players. When I've sometimes announced, for example, on a BBC Symphony Orchestra tour, that we're going to take Ida Haendel, there's not one face which doesn't light up with appreciation. Now, the reason for this is that she's such a thoroughgoing professional.
I have to confess that I never know how I'm going to play it. So every time I play it a little bit differently,
Well,
don't
I sometimes think that, yes, when I'm accompanying you.
I'm sure
But
I
I
do.
mean, that adds to the ending as what you just played. Can we just do it again?
Yes.
And start out the chorale,
Right.
just exactly where you were. When we rehearse, as we often do in a room together with a concerto, with myself at the piano, she's thinking of the whole thing in terms of the final finished result. And that's something a conductor appreciates. To work with her is a privilege which is perceived by the orchestral musicians, however far from the center, from her actual performing epicenter they are. They realize that they're in the presence of a great musician.
I feel that I play for musicians, basically. When I go out there on that stage, I think only in terms of musicians. Because if the audience likes me, I am happy, naturally. But I know I play for musicians, I play for orchestras, I play, because these are the people who know what I'm doing. If I satisfy musicians, if I satisfy the composer, then audiences are bound to appreciate that. Music is so versatile. It should reach everybody when it's really good. It's necessary to work in radio, TV, and recording studios to make our music available to as wide a public as possible. But it's not easy. If you play in a studio, for instance, where it's all so austere and clinical, and there is the light, and you have to start playing, well, that's not very, very gratifying. I always prefer to have a live audience in front of me. You can do so much more and give so much more, and you are much more at ease, in a sense, when you feel that there is a live audience listening and collaborating with you in that performance. The management of a career is terribly important and terribly difficult and a tremendous responsibility. In my case, of course, I had my father, who I thought, and a lot of other people thought, was absolutely marvelous. His involvement, some people resented very strongly. Perhaps we didn't have the savoir-faire or the PR which is necessary in order to establish a beautiful relationship with people, because you do depend upon other people in order to have a career.
I was sure with her that she is a great genius, and that did not mean a thing to me what people say.
And I'm not referring only to Ida, but young prodigies obviously have parents who look after them, or guardians. Sometimes an agent is not dealing with the prodigy ones, they're dealing with the parents, which can, in certain cases, make for difficulties. But after all, you give a prodigy an opportunity, and if you advise them properly, they take advantage of that. They don't overexpose themselves. And then it's up to them, really, whether their talent is going to develop in the way it should, so that they become a great, full-blown virtuoso.
Father was very watchful over me, and especially in the developing years when I could have stopped developing and just become another violinist with technical skill and stopped there. But what made me quite desperate at times was his dissatisfaction with my with the purely musical development. And he was always saying, well, I'm not satisfied. You play beautifully, but that's not good enough. I want you to become a serious musician, not just a good fiddle player. And as I grew older, I then realized myself that this is the most important thing.
The first thing you notice about the sounds she produces is the tone quality itself. There is that incredible intensity to the tone quality. Her vibrato is very narrow, and it's very intense. And then there's the strength, the incredible strength of that bow arm, which produces a sound that is always alive, always full, always dramatic, always dynamic. It never lets you rest.
The most important thing in my life has always been my family. In 1952, when my sister Alice married, we all moved to Montreal. An early performance in Montreal was in the Forum, a vast place more accustomed to hockey players. But I enjoy playing for large crowds.
I remember very well a concert in the Forum. At that time, we had these dollar concerts in the Forum, which was packed all the time. She played the Lalo, as far as I remember, for the first time again with the Montreal Symphony. And since then, it was a normal normal thing that she would play with the Montreal Symphony.
On this occasion, 20 years later, in 1987, I played in the Montreal Forum with the Montreal Symphony Orchestra under its current musical director, Charles Ditois. It's terribly exciting, very gratifying when you hear that thunder of applause and that spontaneous reaction to a good performance. Then you really think, well, I must have been good tonight, or something like that.
50 years of playing the same concertos over and over again. One has to put himself in a position of the right mental attitude to perform them beautifully over and over again. And I can tell you from my own humble experience that that is a very difficult task.
I do feel a sense of involvement every time I play the same concerto. So in other words, what was in the past, there is no such thing. Every time it is a new experience. It is as if I had never played it before. I'm not pretending. I really feel that way, because if one plays a work by a great, great composer, it never becomes stale, and every concert is new. On this occasion, I'm playing the Beethoven Concerto with the Montreal Symphony Orchestra in my home city's principal concert hall, Place des Arts. The conductor is the orchestra's musical director, Charles Ditois. Music is part of everything. Music is life itself. I don't understand how people can exist without music. I suppose they can. They've got to find something. Every human being has to find an outlet to express himself or herself in some way. For me, I see no existence without music because it's been part of me almost since I was born.
I cannot see how you can explain that a young child could pick up a violin, play it intuitively, could play the Beethoven Fiddle Concerto and win a prize when she was an infant, and only later discover that she couldn't really properly read music. I mean, it's one of life's mysteries.
She always played extremely well. Some of her recordings of the 1940s, the early 1940s, are absolutely dazzling. Isaac Stern and Yehudi Menuhin are the two who are alive today who have had careers as long as she.
What is so remarkable about her is that you know that you can depend on her. You know that whether she's going to play the Elgar or the Sibelius or the Stravinsky, that it's going to be a thrilling, direct, human, and perfect performance.
Ever since I was a child, I wanted to play in New York. It was the ultimate goal of my career, I thought, and everybody else's. Prior to the war, I had already been known as a prodigy, and just before the war, I played concerts internationally. So there it was. I was on my way to the United States. I was going to give a recital at Carnegie Hall, which was very exciting and very wonderful. For an accompanist, we decided to take the #1 in those days, and that was Arthur Balsam. The only shadow on my happiness at making a New York debut was that neither here nor in the American tour which followed had impresario Sol Hurok arranged for me to play with a prominent American orchestra. Though I enjoyed chamber music, I had already specialized in the concerto repertoire, and I had hoped to begin my American career playing a concerto. But Arthur and I got on very well. It was a pleasure to work with him.
In those days, even I was much younger than I am now. But still, I could even then see what a great talent this was. And it was a very, very great pleasure for me to play with her.
I played that sonata maybe, I don't know, how many years ago. Many, many, many years. Mass of confusion. Okay. Great. So how about doing Brahms for old memory's sake, which we played so many years ago? I felt that my dream had come true. This was what I was aiming for all my life since I began to play the violin. And there I was finally on that stage of the Carnegie Hall. Both musicians and the audience received me marvelously well. The critical reaction of my debut was, on the whole, favorable, but to be perfectly frank, not as enthusiastic as a lot of musicians predicted. And that was a bit of a disappointment. The second time I played, the reaction was a lot better. After years of darkness in wartime London, the bright lights and excitement of New York made up for a lot, even for the poorly organized midwinter tour of small American towns that followed. Now concert tour followed concert tour in Europe and South America. There were good times and bad times. Financially, it could be difficult, with fees sometimes barely covering expenses. My first experience on the soil of the Holy Land was quite extraordinary. There was a war going on, and my manager, Harold Holt, strongly objected to my going to play in Palestine at such a tense moment, critical moment in the life of the country. But my father said, we've been asked to go to Palestine, and I'm going to take Ida to play in Palestine. We went there, and of course everybody was very, very tense. The situation was very, very critical. Everybody was frightened and sometimes even in a panic. I recall very vividly, we traveled once from Tel Aviv to Haifa in an armored car, and there was, even though it was an armored car, there were shots heard. Everybody tried to go under the benches and hide. We just experienced what the local people experienced, and we had to take it in our stride.
She has been coming to Israel since its inception, since the Palestinian days. She has, of course, like a few others, not ever taken a dime for it. She has always volunteered her services. Orchestra absolutely adores her. And she's just been a regular with us.
In October 1986, I was in Tel Aviv, rehearsing the Brahms Concerto with the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, directed by Zubin Mehta.
One feels her foundation in the deepest roots of Central Europe in the most positive sense. I've never played or accompanied Ida with an orchestra that the orchestra is really not completely, especially the string section of that orchestra, in being in admiration of this playing. You know, it is, every bar is thought out, it has this solidity. It's a pleasure to accompany. There's just no problem. was here during the Yom Kippur War, and we played at army bases, etc. And we played money, for raising money for the Soldiers Fund, etc. Ida is a real trooper.
I think I have been very close to Israel. The country meant and means a lot to me. Being born Jewish, of course, I was asked, when did you come to Israel for the first time? And I think I said once, and I still mean that, 1,000 years ago. The orchestra meant and means a lot to me. I think every Jew, every Jewish person has to be interested in promoting, helping, encouraging the existence of that orchestra. I feel so uplifted when I come to Jerusalem. I think there's something special because it embraces all religions, all creeds, every human being. It feels, in a sort of way, very special in Jerusalem. You don't feel like an average sort of person. That's the way I feel when I'm there. I think I see everything that happened according to the Bible. I can almost visualize and see all the holy people passing through. So I think that from every point of view, it's a very uplifting, a very inspired experience. I feel quite different. I have to say that. I feel different when I come to Jerusalem. When I first played the Brahms concerto, in my very early years, naturally, I didn't know what it was all about. I only found my way in the Brahms in my later years. As I probed deeper into the significance of the concerto, I came to the conclusion that perhaps, for me, he is the most complete of all composers. There is everything there. Lyricism, very masculine when necessary, and the melodies, the themes are so wonderful, so sublime. I don't think there is one superfluous note.
This capacity to draw that line between seducing the attention of the audience and forcing them to breathe with you, to feel with you, that their pulse becomes the pulse of the music. It's a very very special quality. Horowitz has it. When he sits down to play, everybody's absolutely mesmerized. And Ida has that quality, as Rubinstein, as Isaac Stern had, as Yehudi Menuhin had. These are very, very special qualities. And there are only a few people in each century who have that capacity to magnetize and polarize an audience.
The Huberman Centenary was a rare opportunity to spend a few days in company with a number of my violinist colleagues. I had just played the Sibelius Concerto and returned to the stage to bow, not noticing my colleagues Isaac Stern and Shlomo Mintz. I was so moved. It was such a wonderful gesture. Absolutely unforgettable. I've been rather isolated from the rest of the violinists, possibly because I've been concentrating more on a soloist career, playing mainly concerti with orchestras and so on. The soloist's career is basically very lonely. It's very hard to avoid travel. And it's very hard, especially on a woman, the constant waiting, the endless waiting at airports. But in order to bring music, we've got to go and seek out our public, not the reverse. We can't have the audiences come to us, as much as I would like that. But this travel does sometimes provide opportunities to meet people in various corners of the world, like my friend Ken Noda. We played a little Mozart when we met recently in New York. In spite of the hardships of travel imposed on a concert artist, I must admit that it has provided me with opportunities to see places and meet people around the world, and that has been a rare privilege. In 1973, with the London Philharmonic Orchestra directed by Sir John Pritchard, I toured China. Rodney Friend was then concertmaster.
I always have the feeling with Ida that you can put her on the North Pole and she's going to take out the violin and play with freezing cold hands equally as well as she's going to play in the Royal Festival Hall in London or Carnegie Hall in New York.
Italy is the birthplace of Niccolo Paganini, the virtuoso who composed this music and who invented so many of the violin playing techniques we now take for granted. Italy is, of course, where the finest violins were made, including my own Stradivarius. Venice is absolutely unique in the whole world, and I was enchanted to be here just as any tourist would be. I first visited Venice at the invitation of Maestro Sergio Celibidache, who invited me to play with him at the Biennale. My collaboration with Celibidache here and in many other European centers was one of the most enriching musical experiences of my life. I arrived in Venice, I remember very clearly, on the lovely September afternoon. We stayed in a modest hotel opposite the Teatro La Fenice. It's a wonderful concert hall, this jewel, La Fenice. I've returned this time to Venice's neighboring city of Padova. I will be playing a piece I love but rarely have the opportunity to play. The Bach Concerto in A minor. Claudio Scimone will direct his fine chamber orchestra, I Solisti Veneti, and we will play in the ancient church of Santa Sofia.
fiddler, there is so much at risk, and it all somehow miraculously seems to work with her. There's the sound, of course. It's a very unique sound, like all great fiddlers. It's an instantly identifiable sound, but it has marvelous focus and penetration. There's the extraordinary technical ease. She seems to know no technical difficulties. And there's that extraordinary ability to get to the heart of the music.
When you are on the platform, you really don't think in terms of anything but the music. At least I don't. And you are, even then, very isolated from everything and from everybody. You don't think in terms of audiences, you don't think in terms of critics, you don't think in terms of anything, but to do justice to what you are trying to say in the music. So it is a kind of a separation from everybody. We stand there on that stage and we've got to be perfect as far as humanly possible every single time. But I try to make myself not think in those terms. I try to think only in terms of the music making and the fact that I'm playing with a wonderful orchestra, a wonderful conductor, and to derive pleasure from that point of view. But I would certainly never call it having fun. As I got older, I was lucky to play with great, great conductors. One of the first was Rafael Kubelik. I was so enchanted by his music making. He opened my eyes to many, many things which escaped me.
She's an extraordinary woman. She's not only a great artist, but I always felt that she wants to get into the core of things and the musical, real understanding of composers, not only just to be a virtuoso.
I've been asked how I feel about my early recordings. Well, I have to say that I don't often listen to them. I don't listen to my recordings, period, if I can avoid it, because they are never really satisfactory. You always think, oh my God, if only I had done that, if only I could improve upon that. Also, I'm trying not to record and repeat the same phrases again and again because it becomes so stale. So I'm trying to do everything in one take. When I do listen to them sometimes, and I did a lot of the virtuoso acrobatics in those days, I have to say that they're not too bad. I think that maybe in my previous lives at one time I might have been Spanish, because I really do identify with the country and with the music so very, very much. The basic rhythm of Spanish music appeals to me personally tremendously. The Sinfonia Español by Lalo is so totally Spanish in its idiom, even though it was not composed by a Spaniard. I think that really a great genius, once he sets out to write, to compose something of a specific country, usually he finds the language. Well, I always thought that my obligation first and foremost was to the composer. I always tried to express what I thought, in my own humble opinion, the composer wanted. Sibelius was actually the first composer I was in contact with had a personal contact, as it were, because I had played a concert in Helsinki in the 50s, and to my amazement and delight and thrill, I received a letter from him full of praise.
You played it masterfully in every respect. I congratulate you upon the great success, but above all, I congratulate myself that my concerto has found an interpreter of your rare standard.
Well, that was such an exciting event in my life, and of course it's a tremendous treasure. Then I also played William Walton's violin concerto in Britain, and these wonderful composers wrote to me thanking me for the recordings and performances. So it's a wonderful thing to have, and it's the ultimate ideal of an artist's career to have a letter from a composer, a living composer.
Whenever they're not involved, you'll find the orchestral musicians are watching every turn. I think that they find it absorbing that this small lady, she's very small, she has tiny hands, which she says is no handicap at all. It's a great benefit to be able to leap around the fiddle the way she does. But they watch her and they are amazed that a small lady can create a performance of such rugged intensity. The Sibelius is a classic example. No one plays the Sibelius with such a rugged intensity as Ida. No man does.
Though Montreal is home, I spend as many free days as I can in my Miami house because I love the sun. I don't like very cold winters. And so I just love being here when I can sneak in from my concert tours.
It has been more of a European career than a North American one. She played with the New York Philharmonic for the first time only 2 years ago, which I was very surprised to hear. That's why I immediately invited her.
In recent years, I have all of a sudden begun to play a lot in the United States, of course in Canada, where I live, and it's very gratifying.
In Ida's case, audiences have always responded. Audiences have always reacted to the intensity of the playing. Sometimes other musicians, other music critics have not seen what it is she's doing in the context. But that has changed, and now, of course, I mean, everyone recognizes that this is a supremely great artist.
Of course I would do it all over again. There is absolutely no doubt, because that's what I was born for. I'm sure that there was absolutely no other choice for me.